Phil Rowley.
Doesn't matter.
I called you Phil Rowley for years, and then I've started hearing you say your name, so I changed it, but I thought I'd do it right this time. He's returned for another great presentation. But for many of you in the list here tonight, this is the first time to meet him. He's an excellent tyer with great technique, and he's good at explaining what he does. Phil's been fly fishing for more than 35 years. His passion for fly fishing has taken him across North and South America, and he's best known for his stillwater adventures. Phil is also a competitive fly fisher. He was a member of the gold medal winning team at the 2017 Canadian Fly Fishing Championships. Phil has authored 5 books, including The Orvis Guide to Stillwater Trout Fishing and the recently published Tying Flies with Phil Rowley and Friends. He's a proud recipient of the Fly Tyer Magazine's Lifetime Achievement Award and the Gene Guy Coat Award for his contribution to Canadian fly tying. When he isn't on the water, Phil travels across North America performing at outdoor shows, giving seminars, speaking to fly clubs, and running fly fishing schools and fly tying clinics. Phil guides on the lakes near his Edmonton area home, and he's appeared on numerous TV shows. He's been a co-host of the New Fly Fisher TV show for over 20 years. And you can visit Phil online at philrowleyflyfishing.com, and I'll put it in the chat later on here, and stillwaterflyfishingstore.com. And you can find him on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Phil.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hopefully I can live up to that. So I'm going to tie 3 flies tonight. I used 2 of them down in Argentina, but they are small nymphs that work everywhere. One's just a variation of a Copper John, another's a variation of a pheasant tail, and then a small chironomid. So I think I'll start, because it's in the vise, I'll just switch over here to this one here, which is the red Copper John. Red is a very popular color to use for nymphs down in South America. We're talking Jurassic Lake. That's where I do hosted trips every year. It's a lake that holds an unusually good population of large rainbows. Your average fish is probably 12 pounds. You're going to be running into fish in the 15 to 20 to 22 pounds at times. All fishing from shore. It's an area known for its windy conditions. You're fishing floating lines most of the time. A lot of times now under indicators, fishing along the rocky shores where the fish come in to hunt the freshwater shrimp scuds that are their primary source of food. The other things they eat there are snails and zooplankton. That's about it. It's quite different when you look at other North American still waters that have lots of different insect populations. These guys just get big and fat eating that stuff. So, and like I said, usually it's windy, although this past trip, which I just got back from in this past November, we had unusually calm conditions. We had a couple days of pretty strong wind, and then we had 4.5 days where the lake was like a flat mill pond, which is very atypical for that, and made fishing challenging. And small nymphs like this proved to be the order of the day. So these are flies you can certainly use on your own waters as well. So this is the Argentine Copper John. All 3 of these patterns are on my YouTube channel. I'll try and be true to how I tie them, but with every fly I'm always monkeying around with different ways to tie things. So into the vise I've got a Daiichi 1760. This is a 2 extra long curved nymph hook. One of the things down in Argentina that's important, and a lot of times when you're fishing still waters with big fish, is your hook strength, because a lot of times with well, down there we're using 16-pound tippet all the time, and low stretch lines and you got a big fish, your hook is a liability. So if you have light wire hooks, they'll straighten out. But these Daiichi hooks really stand that pace. So onto the hook, I've got a 7/64. This is number 12, a 7/64, or I think 2.8 millimeter bead, tungsten bead. You could certainly use a brass bead as well, depending on the conditions you're going to use it in. We use tungsten down there a lot because of the windy conditions and hanging this thing under an indicator and just trying to get it down in that surface chop. For the thread, I'm going to start with black. This is Semperfli black nano silk in the 50 denier. I really like this stuff. It's very strong. It's a gel spun thread, so it's a little slippery. But typically with polyester threads, you can get a couple of wraps on and it'll hold. Some tires will put a little coating of super glue on the shank. Others will wax the thread a little bit. I just overwrap it more than I normally would, and that'll hold. It gets some grip. And then when you go to trim it, you don't want to nip it like you would with a regular thread. You want to hold it under tension and just come in and kind of push the scissor blades against it to saw it off. Because if you just try and trim it, what tends to happen is the thread frays and just looks kind of messy. So we're just putting a base layer of thread down there. For the tail, we're going to use some red goose biots. Again, just a variation of a Copper John, which normally would have, what am I trying to say here, would normally have brown biots. So we'll just come in and we're going to isolate 2 of them off the stem here. These 2 will do. Come in with my scissors, trim them off. I'm just going to off camera quickly. I'll show you what I've done in a second. I've just repositioned them. The biots have a natural curvature to them, so I want to put them so that they splay out away from each other. I'll just get a grip on them here and try to make sure they're even, so they're like this. So they push away, and I want to tie in a tail that is about half the shank length long. So what I'm going to do is take those 2, make sure they're as close to even as I can get them. I'll place them onto the hook like this and actually force the hook shank between them. Come up with my left thumb and forefinger, pinch and hold them in place, go around once, twice, and then apply tension on the up. And that should get them more or less positioned where I want them. I still have just a few wraps on that I can reposition them, but those look pretty good. I don't think the fish is going to swim up with any kind of micrometer or anything. And I'm just going to walk this up, close touching turns, and just secure these biots all the way up the shank. The primary reason is to make sure I have a nice smooth foundation, because we're going to have the standard sort of wire body that is common to all Copper John. So I want to go at least 2/3 to 3/4 up the shank. Now I'm up into the thorax area. I can come in at this point if I want and just nip out the remainder here without nipping out my thread. And that little stub that's sitting there, we'll just tie that in. Just cover all of that up. Now we're going to tie in the wire, and that little stubs will get covered up. You got to play around with the wire size, what you like. Probably a medium wire would be best on this, but I'm out of it right now. So I'm just going to use some brassy sized red wire. The small size is too small and the large is too big. So we're just going to take a section of this and I'm going to secure it, if I can, by pushing it inside the bead, binding the tip of it down, and making sure by the time I get to about this point that everything is well tied in, and I'm just going to secure it all the way along the side of the shank, all the way down to the base of the tail. Now, the one thing that's important with a wire body is making sure it's as smooth as possible. And we can go back even a little further there. The beauty and curse of macro photography. You can see all your flaws in large scale. You could build up a smooth underbody going back and forth, and consuming a lot of tying thread. But what we're going to do here is we are going to... Well, those are fine. I was just looking at my tail. Wasn't terribly happy with how they splayed out, but they'll still function. You can use super, like Unifloss, which is a stretchy material, but I'm just going to use a single strand of this dirty bug yarn, which is just basically a red wool. And I want to use a color that is complementary or the same color as the wire, so if it peeks through or whatever to the fish, it looks all the same. You're not seeing black spots, you're seeing red spots. So this is a 2-strand yarn. So I'm just going to come in like so and gently pull them apart to make it a single strand. So I have a little bit more control. I can untwist this and flatten the wraps. I just squared the end. I'm going to take my tying thread, open turns, back up, secure this in place here and let the thread hang. And I'm going to wind this down the shank. Being careful not to pull too hard, because if you pull too hard you can fray this, like I just almost did. In fact, I did do that, so we can just... Happens, just undo it and grab strand 2. Because if I use the 2 strands together, it tends not to want to flatten down. And that's what we want. We want that nice, flat, smooth underbody. So again, we'll try that again, and I won't be quite as aggressive this time. Nice. And I'm kind of, as I wind it, I'm kind of running it through my thumb and forefinger to flatten it out. So I'm going right down to the base of those tails, and then I'm kind of skipping. I took a wrap there. Whoops. Let's go back again. I'll slip my grip. So I'm down at the base of the tails, and then I kind of just move that forward. I actually skipped a spot, and I'm just trying to build up a nice flat taper. So I have a nice foundation to form my wire body along. And then when I get up to my tying thread into the thorax area here, I can tie that off with a couple of wraps and remove the excess. And if you want, you can come in and carefully clean up any of those really long fibers, but hopefully the wire that we're going to wrap over in a second is going to cover that right up. And again, if you miss a gap here, you've just got a nice red, kind of buggy underbody that's going to stick out as well. So we're going to grab that wire and start wrapping right at the base of the tail. And the goal here is to try and get the wire one wrap, and that's not good enough there because it's nowhere near what I want. So I'm trying to make sure that I place this wire, and I'm using my thumbnail, one wrap against itself. I'm still not happy with that. Anyway. And it's me being fussy. If there's a few gaps, it's not the end of the world. The nice thing about this, as I come over the top, I can compress these wraps and it'll kind of squish down onto that soft underbody. I can use my thumbnail to push the wire wraps. Every couple of wraps or so, I can come in with my thumbnail and just push them back. And just walk this right up. Now we're sort of, what I like to do whenever I tie nymphs as well is to always sort of overwrap the body, if you will. So it disappears into the thorax. So I'll show you when I create the thorax and the wing case. So I just tied this off, twisting motion, break away the excess. There's a big bloody gap in it. I missed the spot there. Always fun tying around a camera. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put in the little flash over the back. You could use red holographic. This is mirror tinsel in red. This fly has an overall red theme to it. So I'm just going to take a small length of this off the spool. Take as much as I want and then hook it back in the spool. Errant strand there. I'm just going to hold this, just getting it positioned in my hand here. And we're just going to come in. What I'm trying to do is to get this red tinsel sitting on top of the hook. So I'm just lifting up on it, which tends to center it, and I've wound back onto the body. Right, so my body will disappear in, my body will, you won't have a ditch, if you will, between your abdomen and your thorax. Now for the wing case, you could use black. I always like this dark reddish brown from Rainy Stretch Flex. It's just a great color. I use it for bodies on chironomid, pupa, all kinds of things. Shellbacks on water boatman and backswimmer patterns. You could certainly use black. You could use thin skin. And I've just taken a short length. And we're just going to lay that in just behind the bead a little bit. Tie that in, again making sure I've got it flat on top. A little stub of this sticking out. Wrap all of that down. And then secure that back on top like so. And instead of the original Copper John had kind of a soft hackle legs, we're going to use some... this is red stretch floss, super floss, sexy floss, span flex. It's got about a bazillion names for it depending on the provider. So I'm just going to take 2 strands. And roughly at the midpoint of those two, I'm going to go back up about midpoint of the thorax. I'm going to I'll bring the bobbin up better into view so you can see what I'm doing here. Oops, we have zoomed somehow, so let me back that out. All right. Not sure why we zoomed like that. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I've doubled these around the barrel of the bobbin. Grab both strands and see how they've folded them around. And then I'm just going to suck them down on top, do a couple of wraps, and then I'm going to position them on the sides by literally grabbing one set, making sure I've got, and moving them around to the side of the hook. Whoops. And then this one, I think what I've got, that's what I've got. I got the wrong ones. There we go. Just grabbing one leg from one pair and one leg from the other, and just sort of get those positioned in like so. We'll trim those to length later. But I'm not sure why our camera, I'm just going to switch cameras. See what I'm doing. Okay, so we got the legs in place, and then you could use peacock curl, and that's I think if you go to the tying video, that's what I did. But more and more, I'm using dubbing, like an ice dub here, because it's just easier to work with and it's more durable than peacock curl. And after it gets chewed up a bit, it just gets buggier and better. So I've taken a sparse amount, and I'm just going to moisten my fingers a little bit and twist this around the tying thread, making a relatively thin dubbing noodle. I'm spinning it on the thread a little bit off camera, and I'll push it up into view. But you can see how I've left a little bit of bare thread. And this allows me, whenever I dub, whether I'm doing twisted dubbing like this or a dubbing noodle for like a balanced leech or something with bushier flies, I always like to leave a little bit of a bare thread that allows me to walk this, first of all, back into position, because I want this dubbing to start right back here at the base of that wing case. So I'm just weaving this through. We'll go through one more time. Then I jumped in front of that last pair of legs, and we'll put a couple of wraps in there, and then bring it in front of, we just want these to kind of stick out. I'll tip it on its side a bit to sort of stick out like a V on each side. And I probably got a little bit too much ice dub on there, so I'm going to come up and remove that. Fold those legs back out of the way and walk that dubbing forward like so. That's what I want. I want a real buggy, scruffy thorax. Oh, there's a few fuzzy strands there. So I'm just going to clear a bit of a path on top. We can always trim things up when we're finished. So the next step is to pull the wing case over the top like so. And just work my thread, and these legs should more or less stay out of the way. Just going to pull on this. I want to pull on this stretch flex tight enough to pull it down neatly over the back of the, let's get my hands out of the way here, neatly over the back of the thorax, but not so tight that when I trim it off it just springs out from underneath the thread wraps. So I'm just wiggling that, make sure it's on top. I'm going to come in and just carefully nip, trying to not trim a leg. Trim off the excess. And then we're going to take our red mylar over the back. A couple of wraps over the top. The beauty of this nano silk too is I can spin this thread. If I spin it counterclockwise, it'll flatten. If I spin it clockwise, it will cord up and get a little narrower, which is what I'm doing now. Then I'm going to fold everything back just to expose the bead and put a couple wraps in front, and then come in and carefully nip off. And then we're just going to do a whip finish. Pull down, form our whip finish. Of course, all of a sudden I can't form a whip finish anymore. And you don't need a lot, because we're going to coat this back with some UV resin. So we've got a 2 or 3 turn whip finish. Again, under tension, open scissor blades, and just push them to cut and sever. So we'll do that, and then we'll trim the legs. So the way I like to trim them is I'm going to trim the back pair. Truthfully, I like a little longer legs. They may look a little goofy and a little out of proportion, but when I trim these legs, we got a little bit of dubbing going all over the place there. When I trim these legs, if I want to trim them loosely, not under tension, it'll end up a lot shorter than you think. But I want to trim them just a little bit longer, about halfway up the tail, like so. Longer legs, I find, tend to kick a little better. And then I'm going to come in and trim, use those other legs to trim the front legs approximately the same length. Again, I don't think fish are going to measure that, so I'm just going to come in and trim some of those errant fibers out of the way. And while that's sitting horizontal, I'm going to come in with my UV resin, and I'm going to use I like to use the thinner viscosity stuff and build it up in coats, as opposed to really thick stuff that just gets a little unmanageable. The beauty of all these resins is, no matter their thickness, that's pretty thin, but it doesn't run wildly all over the place, and then I just come in and cure it. And I might do another coat on top of that, because what this does is it really gets that red mylar that's running down the back of the wing case to really pop, I think. So there you have it, the finished Argentine Copper John. You can come in and trim, and I think I accidentally somehow trimmed a tail off. As you noted, when something goes wrong, it all goes wrong. So this is a cripple now. But that's simply it. I'll show you the other one with the intact bits and bobs on it. It's got two tails somehow. In moving around the camera, I accidentally trimmed but you can see there, simple bushy thorax. Ideally, you want the wire wraps a little closer, but you could arguably just make that red yarn body with a rib, because it just looks a little scruffy. So again, we fish this. You could nymph it on rivers. You can cast and retrieve it on lakes. You can hang it under indicators. It's fairly heavily weighted with that tungsten bead and wire body, and those legs kick and move in the stream, and it's just got a color that stands out. And again, down in Argentina, red is a really popular color in many patterns down there. So, any questions on that?
Phil, I love that fly. The Copper John is my favorite fly. I just cannot tie it very well. The biggest problem I have is with those buyouts on the tail. I have terrible time with them.
You can tie them in individually, or I find, like I said, just with a little bit of practice, just sort of, as you slide your fingers down, let the hook shank come up and divide them. So you're tying them in on the sides, and then just get one wrap, two wraps around, and then apply tension. And when you do that, the thread tension should suck in from all points, and they shouldn't shift. And if they moved a little bit, then you've got enough wraps to hold them, but enough wraps to manipulate them as well.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have a problem with them not wanting to split properly, you can use a little dubbing ball.
Yeah.
Which splits them really well.
You can dubbing ball. You can even work thread up in between.
Yep.
And I've seen some people use UV resin. Get them wet, get them set, and then just zap them with a thin coat and just bond them there for a second. And once they're in place, then tie as you normally would.
That's a great idea. I'd thought of that.
Yeah.
Phil,
Yep.
I say a lot that red is a special color. I said it last night at our fly tying class. We were doing a San Juan worm. I say a lot that red is a special color in fishing. You see a lot of red hooks and red, hot spots and things like that. What's your experience about the color red with, obviously chironomid larvae and stuff like that, but as far as just red in flies and stuff like that, what's your view on that other than Argentina?
I do incorporate them in there. Usually when I'm fishing my lakes locally and around North America, I'm a little more imitative in my approach. Those fish down there seem to respond to a little bit of attraction now and then, just to stand out. But I like to throw it in when I can. Reds, oranges, chartreuses. I like a lot of little hot spots. A little, trying not so much to blend in with the rest of the neighborhood. Trying to be a little bit different. Even if they, maybe they don't take your fly out of a feeding response, but they're kind of curious about it and put it in their mouth to see what that's all about. And once they've done that, I'm happy to set the hook on them and and fight them. So I think reds and oranges. I find rainbow trout like oranges a lot. Not the fruit, but orange beads, orange hot spots, and sometimes all orange flies. Some days we'll get them. When you think of your blobs and your boobies and those really abstract flies, those attractors we like to use as well. So, yeah.
Any other questions for Phil about this fly or about stillwater fishing in general?
Everybody's still awake?
Yeah.
All right, let's tie the next one, which is the Diablo Roho, which is and I'll just get it in the vise here, get it off my cork. And it's just a variation of a pheasant tail that was designed by Gary. Oh, let me just look him up here. He's from South Africa, and I got introduced to this fly by my guide, Gary Hughes, by my guide in Martin down in Argentina, and I just like the look of this right away. Again, it's just a variation of a very popular pattern, a pheasant tail, but it's just got that black and red, which is another great contrast in lakes and rivers, and it's just a variation of a pheasant tail. So I'm going to tie it again on the same size hook that I tied the previous fly on, because a 12 2x, you tie this as big as a 10, I suppose, but 12 2x, 12 14, and again I've got that 7/64 bead on there, and we're going to use the same black thread. Let's get this started, and again with the nano silks.
Is it an optical illusion? But that almost looks like a natural bend hook, almost like a. Is it, or is it a straight hook?
No, it's a 2 extra long curved nymph hook.
Okay.
So yeah, it does have a bend, and I'm maybe it's part of being a male, but always attracted to curves. So we're just going to again get that good foundation of thread down our base layer, which provides some traction about halfway between the point and the back of the crush down barb. Then I'm going to advance it forwards, because when I tie in tails, I don't want them to flare wildly. And if I find when I tie the tails in right at the bend of the hook, your first wrap has to be reasonably firm, which tends to flare them. So if I secure them in further up the shank and then secure them down, I have more opportunity to A, to get them better positioned, and B, to adjust my thread tension so they don't flare wildly. So I'm just going to take, I don't know, got there 6 or 8 strands of pheasant tail, dyed black pheasant tail. And you could use dyed black hackle here too. It's just a black tail, and you could argue, sometimes a black saddle or black cock hackle is actually more durable than pheasant tail. Pheasant tail, especially dyed pheasant tail, can get a little brittle sometimes. So I'm just going to envision this tail sticking out about half the shank length out the back of the hook. Sort of standard nymph proportions if you like long tails on your fly, but just going to get this in. Again, a couple of wraps, 2 or 3 wraps around. Going to go like that. That tail's a bit long, so the beauty of this method too is I can just gently pull on the fibers all together, and that's where they're going to be. And that tail in a long, again, sometimes I like things a little longer, just I feel they're going to move a little better. So we'll go with that. Now we've got it tied in. I'm going to come in with my left thumb and forefinger here and just support everything, lifting up on those materials slightly. That keeps them righted on the top of the hook shank so they don't twist around. And I got a nice little gathered tail there. And then we're going to go right back up. And again, what I'm doing here is, the reason I'm going back and forth and up and down the shank is I want to keep my underbody foundation nice and smooth. If I just trimmed the pheasant tail off here, I could end up with a little bump. And depending on what you're using for your body materials, in this case it's not so bad with the pheasant tail, but it's just hard to cover up, and you end up with these kind of uneven looking flies. For the ribbing on this fly, we're going to use kind of size small or .02 wire for this number 12. So I'm just taking a little piece of it off the spool here, and then making sure I put it back in so I don't have it explode and unravel on me on camera, which would be the next thing to go wrong. And again, I'm just going to hold this wire that I pulled off along the near side of the shank, make sure it's tied in, And then once I'm happy with its tying, I'm just going to walk it down the near side, distributing it around, and tie that in place there. And again, the wire is going to distribute the thread pressure so that tail won't flare. And then the body is just like a regular pheasant tail. So I'm just going to pull off another slip off the side of this. Again, not too many. Going to even up the tips by pulling the fibers perpendicular to the stem. And I'm just switching them around in my hand off camera here. The tips are kind of brittle and a little uneven sometimes, so I've just trimmed them even and tied them in by the trim tips. I want to tie them in by the tips, so as I wind the fibers forward, they're going to get progressively larger and build in a nice taper. I can build in a little bit of an underbody taper with some tying thread here. And again, it all depends on what kind of look you like with your pheasant tail. I'm going to take a little nail polish here because my super glue dried up. I prefer to use super glue, but this will work too. And just coat this here. So I got a little bit of adhesive, because one of the problems with pheasant tail is it's brittle. So I'm actually going to take this pheasant tail and wind it around the hook in the opposite direction you normally would. So I'm going underneath away from me, over top towards me. And I'm trying my best to get those fibers to lay out relatively flat and either overlap them slightly or run them adjacent to each other to build up the desired body taper I'm looking for. Okay, and try not to let them slip out of my hands as well. So obviously you want to try and, if you can, look for a pheasant tail fiber that has nice long fibers. So I'm just going to pass this over the top a couple of times to lock it off. And then a couple more in front. I got a little bit of an errant strand there, but that's okay. And then I will come in and trim, like so. And again, I can just cover those butt ends up with the tying thread, like so. This will all be covered up in the thorax area anyway. All right, so I wound those fibers coming towards me. I'm now, to further reinforce, so right now underneath, we've got ideally brushable super glue bonds that. The beauty of using the super glue is if you do slip your grip, oftentimes the body won't unravel because it's already been tacked down to that thread underbody on the hook. But now we're going to wind this wire in the traditional way, over the top away. And the reason I like to do this is I get a kind of a crisscross effect, because the pheasant tail fibers were wound in one direction and the wire is being wound in the opposite direction, and that helps reinforce the fly, so it's more durable. And the reason I like to not counterwind the wire is because when I tighten the wire, because it was tied down going over and away, when I tie and pull down on the thread, it's going to want to further roll that wire and tighten it and give it even more durability. So we just got that tied off. Couple in front, thumbnail, pull and twist, and break away the excess. All right, now I'm going to build up a little bit of thread here because I'm trying to fill in behind the bead. So I'm just putting some thread in there because I don't want my legs to flare wildly all over the place. Although I'm tying my legs in a little differently here. So a lot of times you'll tie in the wing case and fold the wing case over, and with So you come tying the wing case with the tips out over the back, fold the wing case over, tie off the wing case, and then the tips, if you're careful, can become the legs as well. But the trouble I find with doing that method is the legs often end up not a consistent leg length. So I'm going to tie this in a little backwards. Just going to take, again, another section of fibers here. Probably a little more than the tail, because I'm going to build a wing case. Actually, I'm going to stop for 2 seconds, and I'm going to put in the same mirror tinsel or holographic mylar tinsel. This is 1/32 in over for again just a bit of a red flashback on this fly. Of course, you could certainly use a pearl flashback if you wanted, but this is all kind of sticking with the black and red theme of this fly. So again, I just trimmed off a length. Lay that on the shank. And then move and lift. See, I'm lifting up on this. The idea is to get that red mylar centered onto the hook. And then we're going to take, now we're going to tie in our pheasant tail. So we're going to come in, take a slip, stand those fibers perpendicular. That evens them up. And rather than strip them off, I'm just going to trim them, because sometimes when you strip, you can accidentally misalign the fibers. So I'm just going to look here. I've got a few fibers that, despite that, didn't align, so I can just reslide them. But now I'm going to tie in my legs first. So I'm going to come up, put the thread right behind the bead. I want my legs about, so they'll fold back about half the shank length, like so. Hold them in place. Do a loose controlled wrap over and another wrap, and secure them in. And then wind back, keeping my pheasant tail on top. And again, you could dub the thorax, but I'm going to reach back into that pile of peacock herl I got behind me and do a traditional peacock herl thorax. So the best place to find peacock herl is just on the eye. The strung stuff works fine, but it can get a little beat up. So I'm just going to take these 2 strands, going to trim the brittle tips away. Wind that in place, secure back, and then I'm just going to grab both strands, being careful not to break them, and wind them directly behind the thread. And by having the thread just in front, I'm just using the peacock herl to push the thread forward. It keeps them nice and gathered. And then I get up, tie off that peacock herl. Don't want to crowd the bead head. Sometimes I will snap the peacock herl off, but because I'm doing a demonstration, I don't want to do that because I'll end up breaking it for sure. So now we're going to fold these legs back. So I'll tilt it so you can see. I'm going to take the fibers and I'm going to try and divide them as best I can into 2 sections, almost turn them into a Y. I got a group here and a group here. They don't have to be perfect, and if I got 1 or 2 that don't want to play, well, we can just trim them out later. So I'm just going to take the far side clump and just start right behind the bead and walk the thread back 2 or 3 turns to tuck them along the side. And I'm going to do the same on the near side. So I'll just rotate the fly this way, and I've got 2 or 3 strands there that just don't want to play. And that's fine too. If I've done this right, the legs should be more or less the same length. And those 2 or 3 that don't want to play, well, we can just get rid of them. And I got 1. Let's see if that's under there. The other side, I got 1 little errant fiber or something here. It's me just being fussy. And now I'm going to bring over the wing case. Making sure I grab all the strands. Pull that over. And then just try to flatten and massage them out. Secure them right behind the bead. Trim them flush. And then pull my red mylar over the top. Pass the thread over once, twice, and then sometimes I will just kind of, I'll show it here, I'm just kind of pulling and wiggling on that mylar to get it to make sure it's nice and well centered, and then fold it back, and then come in and trim the excess. And again, we're going to come in, we'll whip finish first. Again, we don't need 2 to 3 is fine. Hold under tension. Saw it off with the rear of the blades. And then we're going to come in with our UV resin again. And just from the rear of the bead over that mylar to add further reinforcement. Like so. That should cure it. I got a couple of errant legs there that are just being difficult because I'm doing a demonstration. But there you go. There's the finished Diablo Roho, which is Spanish for red devil. So again, fish similar to the Copper John, but you could, this is a, you could tie them in olive with a green shellback, a green bead. You could do it with just a copper bead and some copper. Lots of different color combinations here. It's just a neat little variation of a pheasant tail that works quite well down in Argentina and has worked well for me in other bodies of water too. And just the trick there is I guess the lesson there is I just got one little strand I don't like here. It's just that way of dividing the legs and making sure that they're consistently the same length by tying them in first over the front of the hook. And the bead does tend to flare them. If this didn't have a bead head, it really makes it easy. And I tend to tie this with any kind of nymph, this style, any kind of nymph that has the shellback and the legs are the same material. It's just a way of consistently making your legs the same length on every fly. So there you go. The finished Diablo Roho.
Bill, why did you use peacock curl on the Diablo Rojo rather than dubbing like you did on the Copper John?
You can. They're interchangeable. The dubbing arguably is more durable. For many, easier to do. It's interchangeable. I just wanted to show a different option.
Gotcha.
I think the original was used with peacock curl, but to be honest, nowadays I'm using more and more of the dubbing just because I find it easier to manage, and it's got a bug. The more the fish chews on it, the buggier it gets, and it's just obviously way more durable than peacock curl.
Thank you.
There's even Semperfly now makes synthetic peacock curl that's like a chenille. And they've got it in lots of cool and really, big stuff like regular for larger flies, but some really nice thin stuff for even smaller flies. So, and that's really easy to use. All right. Drink for a second. My last fly is a little chironomid that I recently uploaded to my site. And
any questions before you get started on the next fly? Okay.
All right. So this is the next fly, and it is the Green Backed Pheasant. It's one in my backed series of flies. So it's a blend of natural and more newer materials, and it's got when it's sort of hanging or sitting in the water, it kind of rotates and spins around, and it's sort of somber and catches light. I do, this is the green back version. I do a red back version with kind of a maroon body and red holographic mylar back. I do a black and red version with a black pheasant body and a red back. There's lots of different combinations here. And for this one, I'm going to tie this on a Daiichi 1120 scud hook. You could also tie them on a 2 extra long nymph, but I tie my chironomids on a lot of different hook styles. Sometimes I'll even tie them on a traditional straight shank hook. If I'm fishing, some days it doesn't matter. Other days the fish honestly seem to have a preference for one or the other. If I was to catalog them in some kind of manner, I would probably fish a curved scud hook under an indicator, under a non-slip loop knot, figuring it'll jiggle and bounce a little more and look like a wiggling pupa. Early in the chironomid emergence cycle, the pupa don't move that much. They kind of suspend above the bottom and kind of writhe around there. And so a straight shanked hook like the previous one, that 1760, I tied the Copper John and the Diablo Roho on, would be a better suited for that. So and the nice thing about these scud hooks is they're a short gape. Just struggling to get the bead on them, the palm of my hand here. They're a short gape, so you can use this size 12 is equivalent to about a size 14 or even a 16 standard hook because it's one extra short. So you can get away with a bigger hook to imitate a smaller bug because it's banking on the fact that the fish don't seem to see that hook hanging or don't seem to see it as a threat, or most don't. And because it's short shanked, once it's hooked into the fish, it's very hard to throw. So we're just going to pull this out and we'll put this number 12 in. I would probably tie this in 10s, 12s, because a 10, even though that sounds large, for many waters, a 10 is actually going to be about a 14 2X hook. So it's the same basic overall fly size. It may have a little bit more pronounced curve than the 1760, but it's going to be the fly size is going to be overall the same. So I'm just going to push this bead back out of the way. We're going with the same black thread we've been using all night. So I'm just going to get this started right behind the hook eye. And just get a very, not too much thread bulk. Really gets more important with the smaller you go because we've got to push that bead over a set of gills. Now, the bead is put on with the wide, when I'm tying gills on now, when I have gills sticking out the front of the fly like I'm going to do here, so I'm just bringing this right back up, I like that wide open tapered end of the bead facing the hook eye, facing this way. So this is the wide portion of the bead is here, and the narrow portion is on the other side. Okay, and that just allows you a little bit more bead space to envelop the gills. Now the gills, you could use poly, Antron. The trouble with those materials is they're a little thick, and a little harder rather to compress. So there is a risk of them binding and not allowing the bead to pass over them. A lot of tires like to use Unifloss, or sorry, Unistretch. Whoops, just knocked my mic over there. Unistretch, which is this stuff. But I like to use the Unifloss because when you hit it with a UV light, it fluoresces. Right? It gives off a glow. So when it gets hit down at depth with any light, it's just going to stand out and pop. And when the floss gets wet, it moves very naturally, like the natural thin fibered gills of a chironomid pupa. Because chironomid pupa always have a prominent set of white gills at the top of their head, right? And that's one of the ways we like to imitate them is using white beads. Now I tend to use white beads when I am fishing in deeper water where light is an issue, or when I'm fishing water that has lots of suspended algae in it, because algae can stain up floss gills and other materials like that and give them a green tinge, whereas that white bead is going to pop and stand out. So, but this is, we're going to tie it in its original way with the gold bead. So I'm just taking this single strand of floss, and I'm going to double it around the barrel of the bobbin like so. I just hold it. See if I can bring that in. I hold it. I knocked it over by accident. I thought I put it back where I found it. Okay, so I've doubled this around. I'm just going to grab both strands and bring them on top of the hook like so. And then I'm going to pass the thread around the... I'm trying to push these as far forward as I can. So obviously I get them well tied in, but I don't create much bulk. So I've got a couple wraps there. I'll put a couple of wraps directly in front to cock them up a bit, so when the fly is finished, it won't be, the gills will not interfere with your ability to tie it on. You can give them a little tug to pull them forward, and then we'll just go back and then do a quick whip finish. Try not to get them sucked into the whip finish tool, and tie them off. Now when I'm tying a lot of chironomids, you know, I could be doing 2 or 3 styles or a bunch of these. This, I call this gilling, and I will sit and I will put gills on all the hooks first. So if I'm going to do a dozen of these, I'm going to put gills on 12 hooks, and then I'm going to take those gilled hooks and put the beads on, and then attach my thread and tie the rest of the flies. But we're doing this in one continuous flow right now, so I'm just going to take the bead and pull it forward like so. And that pushes tight up, and then I'm going to take my tying thread, and again get that started right behind the bead, pushing it tight against the gills. Get that thread started, lift up under tension, and kind of shear the tag end off, and then advance the thread down the shank to help create that sort of comma-like posture of the natural adults. And I know I've gone far enough when I pull the thread off the shank, and see how it's on about a 45-degree angle to the point? That's when I know I've gone far enough, and now I'm just going to open it up. And the beauty of these nano silks is, if you, again, I mentioned about spinning your thread, but I'm spinning this thread counterclockwise now, and you can come in with your thumb and forefinger and stroke the thread, and that'll encourage the thread to lay in nice flat wraps. So we're just going to bring that up close to the back of the bead. Now we're going to tie in the rib. The rib is just, in this case, size 12s, 14s. I would use an extra small wire. For 12s and 10s, for 10s, I would use a small wire, or point, in this case, 0.01 millimeter is the same size as extra small. So I'm just going to find the end of it here, and remove that, and I'm going to tie that in from behind the bead down the shank. Chironomids, I find, are one of the patterns, and midges in general, same thing. It's the same bug, just a different name for it. Is I want to make sure that I have nice, smooth underbodies, because these are usually very slender flies, and there's just no room to hide any uneven buildup on the fly like you would with a dubbed body or something. So we just secured that down the shank, and we'll let the thread hang there. And now we're going to take our body, which is the traditional material. This is light olive pheasant tail. And again, trying to find a fiber that has relatively long fiber length, but you don't want too much for this. This is a chironomid body, so 4 to 6 fibers is all you need. And I'm going to tie it in very similar to how I tied in the last fly. Gather those tips. I'm going to trim them even. Tie them in with a minimum of waste, because I need as much length as I can. Then I can go up the shank. Nice even turns. I can build up a little bit. There's a little bit of a taper to a chironomid pupa. So I can go in, again, remembering to spin the thread counterclockwise to flatten it, smooth it out. I can walk that thread back, down about a third, stop and spin. Because if you're a right-handed tyer, every time you wind over the shank away from you, the tendency is you'll put a twist into the thread and cord it up. We want nice flat wraps that we can control our body taper. Nice and subtle, less is more. At this point, if we want, we could trim our gills. You can trim the gills at any point, but at some point, usually not too far along, I trim them because they just start to get in the way. So the proportions you want on your gills are about the same length as this bead. So you can either eyeball it and trim, or to make sure you're really consistent is to come in, try to do this in such a way you can see what I'm doing. I've got the scissor blades against the back of the bead, and then I just nip them. Of course, if my scissors weren't dull. But there they have the beads. That way, if you use your bead to help guide, you'll always have your, no matter what size you're tying, you'll always have the gills the right proportion. And when it comes to beads on chironomids, a size 12, if you were to tie for example, that size 12 pheasant tail used a bead size one size longer, a 2.8 or a 7/64. This is a 3/32 brass bead. And I always like brass beads on my chironomid pupa because I like to fish them many different ways. Unfortunately, I think sometimes in stillwater fishing, everybody thinks it's all about indicators, and it's not. We like to fish chironomids using floating lines and long leaders, 15, 18, 20 plus feet sometimes. We'll fish them on intermediate lines. We'll fish them on fast sinking lines, depending on where the fish are feeding on them. So by having a brass bead, I have a fly that can adapt to all of those presentation options. If I have a tungsten bead, sometimes they just sink way too fast, because the one thing about chironomid presentations is the ridiculously slow pace that we fish these things at. These things just suspend in the water and then eventually start to elevate their way up using a subtle wriggling motion and gas that they trap beneath their skin to give them buoyancy. So this is an easy food source for trout to feed upon. They just glide around and inhale, so they don't hit these things with any gusto. So I found a little bit of super glue, so I'm going to try here without getting it. See it coming out here. This is a Loctite 404, which is an expensive industrial. So I'm just going to put a little drop on the shank. Grab a dubbing needle. I've got this old beat up one, and just push that down. And then we're going to do the same trick we did with the Diablo Roho, is counterwind this, making sure I haven't accidentally grabbed the wire in the process. We'll just hold that wire back out of the way. And what we're trying to do is wind these fibers around the shank in open flat turns to make as skinny a body as we can. And that super glue will bind the pheasant tail fibers to the shank. And my apologies for my hands getting in the way as I wrap. I'm trying to pull them out as best I can after each wrap. And I'm going to wrap them up almost to the rear of that bead. There's a little bit of space, and I'm just going to come across a couple of wraps, like 2 or 3 wraps across the fibers, and then a couple in front just to further lock them in. And then come in with my scissors and trim away the excess. So again, you're looking for a nice slender body, like so. Now for the shellback, we're using some holographic green mylar. So I'm just going to pull off a length of it. And sometimes there'll be a bit of a curvature to it. If there is, I'm going to make sure that curvature complements the body. So I'm going to want that curvature to go down this way, not opposite to it. So So I'm just going to lay this on top of the shank. Just get it on. Like so, and then I can play a little Russian roulette with myself and just pull this back till I almost pull it out and then put a few more wraps on it. So I've just tied that in place like so, and that's a little off center. So I'm just going to take my thumb and forefinger and move it till it's more on center, and if I don't like it, I can undo it. I'll start it again. So sometimes it's better I start with the material a little bit kiltered towards me, because it's going to naturally want to try and follow the thread over the other side of the fly. So I've got that in place, and then I can support the hook and just pull, and a few more securing wraps like that. And now we're just going to take our gold wire, and then get one complete turn around so it's hanging straight down. And then we're going to hold the mylar on the back and apply tension on the downstroke, because we want to try and get this righted on top. So I'm going to come up, go over the top of the hook, and then apply tension on the downstroke. That way the thread, the pressure will come directly on top of the mylar. If I apply tension right away, there's a risk I will roll that mylar out of position. And with each successive wrap, the mylar gets more and more in place and held down, and it can't really escape on you. So by the time you get up near the bead, it's just sitting in place and it's not struggling anymore. It's those initial wraps that can be a little tricky. So again, a couple wraps over the top, a couple wraps in front, pull and twist and break away the wire. And I can come in and I'll trim this the mylar about even with the bend of the hook. So I've got my scissor blades sitting against the bend of the hook, and just trim it like that so there's a little stub sticking out. And then I'm going to put one strand of peacock herl tied in by the tip. So I've got that prepared. So if you look at a strand of peacock herl, you can see the fibers are predominantly orientated to one side. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off this little brittle tip. That's just going to break off and get me in all kinds of trouble. And then I'm going to take this peacock herl, turn it over, and tie it in so the fibers are pointing down. And just making sure I got it how I want it. Have a closer look here. Fibers pointing. It's got a mind of its own tonight. Pointing down. Get a hold of it. And the reason I tie them in pointing down is because when I go to wrap them, that's going to put a 180-degree turn in them, and then they'll position themselves so the fiber side is pointing out. So we're just I don't want to build up too much bulk, so I'm going to undo some thread wraps here and repeat that. I find if I use two strands, I'll definitely probably get some more reinforcement to them, but they'll be a little bulky. So I'm just going to rotate this around like so. And that didn't go in the way, really. I want to make sure I get this wound so they're pointing down. It keeps wanting to twist on me. So I'm just going to take this twisted section and remove it. Like so. There we go. And then we're just going to wind this around. And basically the thorax proportions are that it should extend no further back than the bead. So I'm going to put 3 to 4 wraps of herl sort of directly, almost like I'm just covering up all my thread work from all the other steps. So a couple wraps over the top, a couple wraps in front. We'll come in, trim this, and then we'll take our nail polish here, Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails, and a little bit of coating on there, because if I tried to just dab that in behind the bead, there's a good chance I'm going to get it in places I don't. I'm going to mat those fibers down, so I'm just letting the thread carry the cement. What have I got going here? Oh, that's right. And again, I'm just going to spin that. Sorry, wrong direction. Clockwise to cord it up and thin it out. Get that one wrap in there, and then I can use my whip finisher to complete the process. 2 to 3 turns, that in conjunction with the adhesive, that will hold, and that'll squeeze out. When I pull that under tension, tends to squeeze the adhesive out into the base of the fibers. I've got some errant fiber thing going on here tonight. I don't know what's going on there. I better clean my glasses. But that's the finished Green Backed Pheasant. Well, let me just focus a little better. It seems to have gone a little out of focus. That should be a little sharper according to the peaking. But that's the Green Backed Pheasant. And again, you can tie it in black with a red back. You can tie it with a maroon with a red back. There's lots of little options here. And it's just a little... So many patterns today use a lot of synthetic materials. Really don't like this sticking out here. It's just me being fussy. Feel a little better about that. So there you have it, the red backed pheasant. Any questions at all?
That's a beautiful fly. I see a lot of use for it here in Nebraska and some of the for panfish and bluegill.
Oh yeah, panfish love eating midges and chironomids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. I've had some good crappie fishing, fishing chironomids for them. Yeah, thin little flies. And I just like that contrast of having a natural material with that holographic back on it. And so as that thing's in the water, it's just catching light and not just flickering and taunting and making it stand out.
Yeah.
You know, we use a lot of flashaboos and anti-static bags and all kinds of things for chironomids, but sometimes it's not a bad idea to throw something that's a little bit more of a throwback pattern. I've been fishing that pattern for over 20 years now, and it still produces, still days. You're always experimenting with chironomid pupa. Can be very frustrating because they're small generally, although we have some lakes I fish in the west that are, we're fishing chironomid pupa in the 12 2x, 10 2x size. We call them bombers. They get really big. That's generally a hatch that comes off in the summer months. But they can be different sizes, different colors, and as they transform from the early stages in their pupal cycle to their final stages before they emerge, they can change colors too. Because they typically start out kind of somber and not very bright, and then, as I mentioned, they start gathering gases beneath their skin, which brightens them up, and they can go from that somber color to kind of a gunmetal gray color to almost silver when they're fully inflated. And of course the trout can key on any stage that they want, which gets a little maddening sometimes. And I've had days where changing a rib color made all the difference in the world, which just makes your head spin sometimes. And other days you could hang a hamburger out there and they would eat it. So I guess that's what keeps us going, is all the different variations.
Yeah, that's what makes fly fishing so much fun.
Some days it's fun.
In Nebraska, we don't get a lot of, we don't have the water that supports caddis or stoneflies. There's some out west. Mayflies, we get very few, but
Yeah.
midges are one thing that is just
They're
like
everywhere.
crazy. We have some lakes close to me actually that a lot of times early spring and late fall, I'll see probably half-inch long gray midges.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
they love muddy bottoms. If your lake or pond has a muddy bottom, they can live anywhere, but they love that stuff. They usually occur in huge numbers in that kind of environment. So a lot of your sort of panfish and bass ponds are a perfect chironomid habitat. Some of my best local lakes are actually the pike walleye lakes I have around me. And the chironomids just seem, other than lake whitefish, which love them, they live a pretty easy life because nothing really gets to them down there. The pike don't. Well, that's not to say it. I have caught small pike and walleye on chironomid patterns, but that was probably more incidental than anything on purpose. But they're everywhere.